Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to show you some basic ideas of how to press a control arm bushing out of a control arm. This is something that you may encounter occasionally if you've got a clunk or a squeak or a rattle on your vehicle and then you decide to dig into the suspension. And maybe you've gotten to this point already where you've got a control arm out of the vehicle and it's time to replace a bushing, and what do you do from here? If it's not something that you've done before, or even if you have, it can be a challenge to get that bushing out. I've done quite a few of them. I've tried many different methods. Some things have gone well, some things haven't. But if you have a basic idea of different methods to get a bushing out, it's actually not very difficult. So at this point, I've already got the control arm separated from the vehicle. It's on the floor here. It's ready for me to press the bushing out. So let's go to the bench and I'll demonstrate for you how to do it. Well, I've got the control arm now on my bench, and it lays out okay actually where the bushing I'm after is up right here. It's accessible, so that works out really well. And you know what? There's several ways you can get these bushings out. In the past, I've sometimes used my hydraulic press. The trouble with that is that you need to get this whole thing positioned in here in a way where it really is lined up with the press. The press doesn't move very easy. This doesn't move very easy either, so that can be kind of cumbersome. So what I would always try, at least to start with for these bushings, is a ball joint press set. And you can rent these from different auto parts stores. They're not terribly expensive to buy. I'm at the point where I've done enough ball joints and enough bushings and other repairs. Probably use ball joint presses for things that I shouldn't use ball joint presses for, but it made sense to just go out and buy my own ball joint press, and I use it quite a bit. So at this point, ball joint presses come with a number of adapters, at least some real basic cylinder type adapters. So in some cases, these fit the bushing well enough to press it out. Not always. But what I like to do with these types of bushings is first, I'll go in here, let me show you the bushing. You can see it. Here's the area that I cut through when I took this off the vehicle. It was really fighting me, so I ended up using the Sawzall to cut through the bushing. So you got the center steel bushing. You've got rubber surround, and that's actually what absorbs the impact while you're driving. That's what allows the suspension to move. That's really what gives you a comfortable ride, and that's also the part that wears out, like in this case. Then you've got a steel outer shell from the bushing, which in this is a really low profile shell. And then you've got the housing from the control arm. So what I'll often do is first press out this, at least the steel center insert. Sometimes I'll get this whole rubber surround and that steel insert out together. And then separately, I'll tackle this thinner outer shell of the bushing. And sometimes it's more manageable to get that out when you separate it like that. Now you can use the adapters that came with the ball joint press if they'll fit. Sometimes, I'll use an impact socket if I have a socket that fits well for what I need to do. You really shouldn't use steel sockets because they are, really hard and strong, but they're also really brittle. So if you use a steel socket, it's possible that you may get all the pressure on there, then the socket could explode. Whereas an impact socket it's more like a ball joint press adapter. Still different material, but at least they're not going to explode. They're intended for that kind of pressure. And maybe they do explode at some pressure. So this is for information only. Don't try this at home. But anyhow, I would not use a steel socket. Personally, I oftentimes do use impact sockets. But let's see what we can do to get this inner bushing out. And then separately, once we get that out, we will tackle the outer shell. Well, so I found a combination of parts that will work here, and I've got a little box of, I'll call it press adapters that I've acquired from other jobs. I've got a bearing race here. I've got part of another bushing I've replaced previously. Here's another one. I've got, I don't know why these hole saw blades are in here, but I may have used hole saw blades a couple times as press adapters, but don't use those. Don't use hole saw blades. Although the combination that I found that I think is going to work here is a piece of another bushing from previous repair, so that's going to work. And I need a flat top area for my press to go onto, so I've got a hole saw blade I'm going to put on that. So don't do what I do, but find some pieces that will fit what you're working on to press the bushing out. I also have this is actually part of my ball joint press, so I'm going to use this on the bottom side, and I'll say kind of to catch the bushing. This is going to give the bushing a place to go while I push it out of the housing here. Then on the very bottom is another ball joint press adapter. This is something that this adapter can sit on. It's made to sit on. And then the bottom side is made to sit in the ball joint press. So, while this is catching, it's going to fit nicely against the control arm. And also it's made to be used with the ball joint press, so it's going to stay in place. So got my ball joint press here ready to go. And then I oftentimes use a impact wrench to move the ball joint press to thread in that screw. It can take a lot of pressure. You absolutely can use a ratchet to do that. The small turns of the ratchet really isn't that difficult to do. But if you do have an impact wrench, whether it's electric or pneumatic, that is definitely much easier and a much faster way to do it. You just got to be careful about how much pressure you're putting on there, and have some sense of feel for your tools to know that you're not putting so much pressure on that something's going to break. If it really seems like you're putting pressure to it, back off and try to do it a different way, because it shouldn't take really that much pressure to push this out with the right setup. So let's give this a try. So I've got the first, well, I suppose the inner layer of the bushing out here. So this is the steel insert, and it brought some of the rubber bushing with it, but not all of it. Some of it's still in the control arm here, and that's fine. So, at this point, there's a couple different ways that I can go with this. And, it might depend on what I'm doing. If this was a performance application and I want to put a polyurethane bushing in here, then I'd want to keep the outer shell. Let's see, here's my new bearing. So I'd want to keep this outer shell in the control arm, because you need that if you're putting a polyurethane bushing or something in here to stay on that. But I would have to get the rest of this rubber out of here, and take a wire wheel and clean up that bearing. I'll call it a race, or that bearing outer shell, so it's ready to accept a polyurethane bushing. But in my case, again, here's the new bushing I'm putting in. It has that outer shell, so I need to get this completely out of the control arm. Now, one struggle that I have with this bushing in particular is that the outer shell in the control arm is a really thin outer shell. So, if I'm trying to take, something like a press adapter, there's a really small margin for what diameter this needs to be, where I can, sit on top of that shell without also either damaging the control arm or just not fitting at all. So in this case, pressing that shell out is very difficult, just because you have to have the perfect size adapter to get in there. So what I like to do in this case is what I call kind of like the nuclear method, where I'm going to take a grinder with an abrasive burr, a similar tool to what I'd use for like head porting, and I'm going to use that to slice open that bearing or that shell, that bushing shell. I'm going to slice it open, and by doing that, it's kind of going to let me peel the shell out of there and just drop it out without using a press at all. So you got to be really careful using this method, but it is a very effective method of removing a bearing shell, or a bushing shell, if you just don't have the perfect size adapter to press that out without damaging the housing that the bushing is sitting in. So I'm going to set up my grinder with an abrasive burr, and let's cut that out of there. Well, so we got the outer bushing shell out of this control arm, and this is a method that I really like to use. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's a real good way to get this out without fighting. It takes time, but it's not a big fight. If you're careful, then you don't even really do damage to the control arm. The only spots that have any damage is, right on the edge where I cut this out. And, since this is on the thickest part of the control arm, it's really not a problem. And, considering how much more damage I could do if I tried to get a press adapter in there to fit on that bushing, which again is really thin. So to get a press adapter that fits on that without contacting the housing is really difficult. I probably would have done more damage to the housing by trying to press this out compared to cutting it out, and then you saw how easy it slides out once you cut it. So at this point, I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper or steel wool and just clean up the inside of this housing, get a little bit of corrosion out of there, and then press in the new bushing. Well, you can see from that video how difficult sometimes it is to press these ball joints in, and that's because it is such a tight fit between or not the ball joint, but the bushing. It's such a tight fit between the bushing shell and the housing that it goes into, and for good reason. And in this case, I'll be honest, I had to set the ball joint press up a couple times, then take it apart, then reset it up because that bushing kept on wanting to pivot to one side or the other. And it's okay if it does a little bit because it will straighten itself out, but if it's really sideways, then you need to back it off, readjust everything, and start over so you don't damage the housing. But I got this bushing pressed in the control arm now, so at this point, this is ready to go back onto the vehicle. So I hope that this video was helpful to you. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel to see other videos like this and some other more fun videos. And I really appreciate you watching. Have a great day.